Good morning, and first of all, thanks very much for joining this interaction. My name is Darshan Kumar Vaidya, Key Accountant Manager EMEA. Here to talk about social responsibility driven by governance in emergency. Just to do some housekeeping, all the attendees are muted, and if you have got any questions during at any time, just use the chat, and that will be logged there, and we'll try to answer. Excuse me. It's a 30-minute session that we will have, and it will be followed by question and answer session. So there'll be a lot of time for live question and answers. And this also, the session is being recorded, so it will be made available to you, and you can go through it anytime in the future as well. And if you experience any technical issues, please use the chat, and we'll be helping you. And also any questions during the session, you have any inputs, please do share. We'll welcome all inputs. Thank you so much. So there is also a session that is upcoming tomorrow, which is the corporate governance in an emergency, where we know that in the crisis times that we live in, we must ensure that our organization has a good governance system in place. So it's about the corporate systems, how organizations should implement governance systems within their systems. So what is the agenda? The agenda is talking about, in reference to the organizations. So we know that when organizations fail, most of the time, it is because that they cannot, because it is the emergency creates a lot of pressure. So they cannot operate as they want and as they were in the past. They sometimes are not able to deliver on their commitments, and hence then the customer's trust is lost, and that's how they fail. So we must also understand the kind of impact the social responsibility has on the governance part and on any organization. We must ensure that we'll cover in this session the governance failures, the social impacts, how our behavior as leadership teams, how that behavior influences the outcomes, and how we can link basically the decisions to the social outcomes. And then what are the governance principles in the crisis, in emergencies that we face. And then we will look at some resources that you can refer to later on as well to understand what are the global best practices, what are the perspectives worldwide. So first of all, let us first understand what is social responsibility. And social responsibility in the context of an organization, it is to ensure that we hear about sustainable development, the ESG framework, the health and safety, the welfare aspects. So all these aspects are covered under the definition of social responsibility. It also considers our stakeholders. What are our stakeholders' expectations? And of course, there are laws with respect to what we can, what we cannot do. And we must be also aware we are living in a connected world. So there is a lot of international scrutiny that happens all the time. So we must ensure that our organization's behavior is consistent with what is expected internationally, international norms. And also the decisions that we take, the responsibility that we understand as our social responsibility, it must be integrated throughout the organization in all our processes, in all our business processes, business maps, and also when we are interacting with our stakeholders, this is practiced as well. So when we referred about activities in context of an organization, it refers to not only the products, but includes services and processes. So this is, in the definition part, we have taken this from the ISO standard. We'll be going through what are the relevant ISO standards. You can see ISO 26000 and ISO 37000, which is mentioned. 26000 standard covers specifically the social responsibility part, as to how we can understand what is our social obligation, what is our social expectations, and how we can meet them. And then the 37,000 is about the governance. So how we can correlate these two, especially in these difficult times, as and when we know that the implementation of several tax rebates, several fees waivers, several initiatives that were taken, especially in the Middle East, in Dubai, in UAE. They were done to ensure that the social responsibility part is considered whenever we take any decisions. But these cannot be taken in an isolated manner. We must ensure that there is governance, there is social responsibility understanding amongst ourselves, and then we must be transparent in our decisions and also ethical in our behavior. So about the social responsibility standard, this is the ISO 26000 to 2010. You might be thinking 2010 is a long way away in the past, but this standard was recently reviewed and it remains the current standard. It includes very good guidance on how we can understand the social responsibility part. And often we use the word right thing to do. That is what is social responsibility driven by. And we assess our commitment, how we can ensure that our organization's commitment is clarified in documentation, in practices, in our behavior, in our decisions. So any organization which has part or role to play in society and environment in general in an emergency can get the ISO 26,000 guideline. It is regardless of what is your type, what is your size, and what is your level of involvement in an emergency response. It is applicable and you can use it. Even if you are an NGO, that becomes very relevant. And even if you are an organization working in any sector, it becomes quite relevant because all organizations contributes in a way to the society. This also talks about not only the societies, but also the impact that the activities of an organization has on the environment, which can then affect the societies in general, community in general. It also talks about health and safety of our employees. It talks about the transparency, and it talks generally about the ethical behavior that we must always adhere to. And then ISO 37,000, it emphasizes the role of the governing body, how the governing body can be the board of directors, it can be even the higher committees that are established if the organization is part of a group. Then there might be a company level board of directors and then a group level board of directors. So a board of directors, that can be a role of governing body. That can assume the role of the governing body, and it must ensure that when we have uncertainty, when we have a lot of pressure in an emergency, then we also respect our purpose, values, and societal expectations. What is an emergency in a governance context? For example, let's say there's a random cyber attack, ransomware, or could be a collapse, maybe liquidity crunch. We are not able to get our money, and which causes our operations to get affected. And as we all know, in the Middle East, the situation of war, which has led to the Strait of Hormuz being affected, and that has created supply chain disruptions in many of the organizations. And then, as we have all gone through COVID-19, we know the effect that a pandemic can have on public health, and it can create a crisis that it did in 2020. This does result in severe time pressure. Why? Because customers expect us to perform as an organization within a certain time. within a certain manner. Societal expectations are there that if you have committed to the aspects of operations, if you have committed to retaining the employees, if you have committed to delivering on time, if you have committed to hosting vulnerable groups, then it all is subjected to severe time pressure. Then often in an emergency, we do not have access to reliable information. The information is often very incomplete. Sometimes we don't know what is the source of truth that we must rely on. And then, of course, there is a high consequence of delay, because if we do not get the information, then our decisions can be delayed, which can affect the weaker sections in the society. So now we have a poll question that will come up shortly. Great, and thanks for your participation. And I can see that, as expected, the supply chain disruption is one of the top type of emergencies that have been occurring, and a cyber attack is also the same as the supply chain. So that is absolutely clear. And in reference to the organizations, we know that we live in a digitized world. So definitely, cyber attack, digital, ransomware and phishing, their attacks, they are very common nowadays. And we know that organizations would be really affected by that. And plus the supply chain disruption, absolutely, the Strait of Hormuz, as we discussed. Yes, those emergencies are there, which can really affect the capability of an organization to function in the manner that it is expected to. Thank you for your participation. There'll be a lot more polls that will come up in a short while, so we'll keep that in mind. And thank you for your participation in advance. So, what happens when the governance part fails during the emergency? Uh, if we don't have a clarity on, in an emergency, who will make decisions? Because in an emergency, we should remember that sometimes the level at which the decision should be made, they are at a higher level. But we must know what are those decisions, who will make those decisions, not multiple people making multiple decisions for the same topic, which can get affected by fragmented information that we are receiving. So that can affect us. We can also get affected because we have not prepared well enough. How in the social responsibility context we can say that we have not prepared well enough, that we have not interacted with our stakeholders in a timely manner. We have not captured what are their needs and expectations, and we have not ensured that they are built into our processes and our decisions. Then also over centralization. Sometimes, in organizations, only one or two, three individuals are responsible at a very high level to make those decisions. That can create a lot of delay in the decisions, and that can reduce the flexibility also, because they may think in a certain manner, and that can get the implementation of the decisions can get affected as a result of that. Then we also sometimes have a conflict between the prioritization, whether we should uh, make the external facing processes, we should be attending them first, or whether we should be attending the internal processes first. So that is prioritization, which was each situation demands a certain way in which we should respond. Then sometimes because we have not prepared well enough, we don't know what is the societal context that we must adhere to. And that can lead to a decision being taken, which can affect the society, but we have not got that considered in our processes. Sometimes we take ethical shortcuts as well because we are under pressure. We think that let's do things more quickly, and we take those shortcuts in place. Whereas if we had prepared, then we would already be aware about what is that ethical behavior that is expected, which can indicate a lack of preparedness and also lack of understanding of what are the future risks that are coming. But the good thing is that all these failures, we can always know about them. We know about them in advance, and they are very predictable, and we can actually prepare for them. And hence, we can prevent the worst consequences of these emergencies as and when they occur. So, how does the governance and social responsibility interact with each other? What can be the outcomes, the societal outcomes that can get affected? First of all, we talk about, for example, let's say in an organization, in an emergency, in a case of, let's say, in a timely manner, we must address, let's say, in a war situation, we have certain infrastructure being affected. Now we dedicate the workforce. We don't think about what is the impact on their safety and well-being going to be. So we kind of try to do that quickly without considering their safety and their well-being. So that can directly impact the social outcomes. There can be deaths. There can be major injuries as a result of our lack of consideration of the social responsibility. Also, we may assign a lot of tasks to and a lot of resources to one area where we neglect the other areas, whereas we must ensure that there is a fair distribution that is taking place. It can then, if we do it well, it can increase the trust of the society in us, and it can lead to increase in the confidence in an organization. Let me give you an example here. For example, in the 2024, we had floods in Dubai. You must have seen that in the newspapers if you are not from Dubai or UAE. Uh, there, lot of infrastructure, homes were damaged, vehicles were damaged. So there was a lot of initiatives, a lot of interactions by several organizations that were really capable of understanding what is the impact, and they made those decisions very quickly. So thereby, the trust and the confidence increased in those organizations that took those decisions quickly. And you must have also heard that in some organizations, because of the lack of the transparency and the ethical conduct and the communication, they were affected with lack of trust and confidence in those organizations. And society can remember these aspects for a long time. There's a long-term impact. We sometimes think that as and when the decisions are taken, if they are incorrect, the people will forget, the society will forget over a period of time, but they take a long time for going away. And the impacts are immediately visible. For example, you lose access to your home. The impact is actually visible absolutely immediately, and they're widely visible because you are not the only one that is affected. And sometimes there can be irreversible impact also. In respect of, we must understand that when an emergency happens, there is always that human angle in place. And that's what we need to consider as our social responsibility as an organization. How do we affect our suppliers? How do we affect our customers? How our actions affect our employees' safety and well-being? How do we ensure that in general the weaker group that we have is considered, and resources are fairly distributed amongst those stakeholders? Of course, we must refine our priorities and behaviors. It is that once we develop scenarios, we practice the governance, we test our processes, we implement those business processes in place considering our social context. Then also we must ensure that they are refined over time and they are improved over time, and we must ensure that they remain current with the societal expectations. So there is a pathway that impacts how decisions can impact. So for example, let's say governance involves a decision logic. We take decision based on a logic, based on information that is conveyed to us, based on practiced scenarios. We behave according to what then is our practices, our ethics, our code of conduct, our values. We behave as an organization according to that. Then we communicate our decisions accordingly to our stakeholders. Could be our employees, could be our customers, could be our suppliers, and could be general the society. And then we also have a response of the society, of the stakeholders. Employees may give us feedback, customers feedback, and so on and so forth. And that can then lead to the social outcomes, a greater visibility, in which we say, this is a good socially responsible organization which took the right steps in defining what is the way forward for the customers or whichever group is affected by that. What you must ensure to achieve this good outcome, you must ensure that you have authority defined. What are the constraints? What are the expectations? Then we must ensure that whichever information that we are receiving, remember, it is often inaccurate and often unclear. So it must be evaluated in an emergency. So how we do that? How individuals act? And then we must also communicate, because if we don't communicate, the stakeholders might get confused as to why those decisions were taken, and that can lead to the trust being undermined and how impact is distributed. And of course, poor governance can lead to reactive, inconsistent decisions. So we must ensure we have balanced, fair decisions. There is a transparency in our decisions. We must communicate the assumptions, the logic behind why we took such a decision. So that can and indicate that there is good governance in place. So when we assign, in a socially well, when we act as a socially responsible organization, what do? We have very clear purpose, wherein which we understand how we are impacting society. There is a clear degree of accountability. Who has taken which decision, and is that person accountable for that decision, and how we trace that accountability. Then we must ensure that there is a oversight as well, not that all the decisions once they are taken they are straight away implemented. There is a review as well, so that if there is an incorrect decision, there is a very short time frame before we correct it. And then our organization's values must drive those decisions, and we must ensure that we have ethical integrity. Stakeholders communication feedback is very essential. We must prepare well, and we must in advance of an emergency communicate with the stakeholders, maintaining transparency, openness with these stakeholders. And then, in an emergency, board of directors may assume controls, and the CEO and the leadership might not have the same level of flexibility of implementing. So there is a sort of differentiation between oversight and management. So as a board of director, we must not jump into the day-to-day management, but we must maintain oversight on what is happening, so that if there is a direction that is to be given to correct the role, then we can do that. So role of governing body is to ensure that there is, in an emergency, we take the correct decisions based on the information that we are receiving, and we monitor those actions. We ensure that our missions, our vision, our values are respected all the time. And also in reference to the documentation, as in when the decisions are taken, we document those decisions so that the speed at which the decision is taken is not affecting our documentation to establish the accountability for those decisions. We must ensure that we safeguard all the interests, the vulnerability, we must respect the vulnerable groups. And then there is transparent reporting that is expected, and communication, as we emphasize repeatedly. Once the emergency is over, we must then review what did we do and what can we do better. So that is through the lessons learned, and thereby we can strengthen our governance resilience. So now the time is for another poll question. Absolutely. Thank you for participating in the poll. And uh, many of the participants have said that there is insufficient preparedness. We don't have, uh, let's say, crisis governance, a crisis management team, lack of clarity on that. And then we also lack stakeholder consultation. That is the second highest that we received in the poll. Moving further, when we understand how the social responsibility should be considered, then we must understand what are the direct and indirect impacts, which group, which community gets affected. Then how do we ensure that there is regular consultation, information sharing with those groups? Could be employees in a faraway location, could be customers in some particular geographical area, could be the suppliers which are in some geographical area. So how we can consult, how we can share information. And then sometimes the access to safe environment, resources can be limited because of the emergency, and then our decisions also increase those impacts in an unwanted manner. So we must understand how our decisions can affect the safety, resources, opportunities. We must always communicate. Communication is really key with the stakeholders in a social responsibility perspective. Very, very key. And we must ensure that we do not neglect any groups, and also at the same time we give adequate emphasis on those vulnerable groups that we identify during our consultation and scrutiny. So when we have lot of clarity, lot of information on who will take what decisions, then we must, as I mentioned earlier, that who is that decision making authority that can be responsible? Because remember, after an emergency is over, we must review, we must understand how we can do things better. For that, we must know what happened. For that, we must ensure that communication, decisions, and persons who are making those decisions are then made accountable for good decisions as well as bad decisions, so that things can improve. And at the same time, when we practice it enough, then there is an alignment between the leadership levels. So it doesn't matter if a person A is the primary decision maker, but when person is not available, the person B takes that, then there is an alignment in the messaging. And then we also avoid the conflicting statements which are sometimes released to the press, released to the employees, released to the suppliers, and we avoid those instances when the mixed signal are being received, because then at that time, if that happens, trust really gets affected, and that can really damage the relationship that we have with that particular stakeholder group. As we repeatedly emphasize, communication is very, very key. Proper, clear, timely communication, and that can really influence outcome. And time also is very important. We must ensure that before the stakeholders realize that there is no decision coming, our decision is communicated. So it is not only proper, not only clear, but in a timely manner. That can increase the confidence and the credibility of an organization. Then we talk about accountability many times, we talk about transparency many times, but what is that? It is that we create records so that decisions are traceable. Then we also make sure that our rationale for taking those decisions, the justifications, are also recorded. And then we do not only disclose the information in parts, we disclose it in full, so that if a stakeholder is dependent on our sharing our information to take their decisions, they can do that also, because maybe our societal impact is through a supplier, not through us directly. It could be the case where our suppliers have a higher social impact than us. So we must ensure that we support with our information at our organization's level. And we know that lack of transparency can lead to various repercussions. So ethical boundaries, we talked about ethical boundaries, how perception is created. But what is that? In reference to the way in which our values are respected, we first of all, organizations have defined values, they have defined mission, they have defined vision, and they have certain principles, certain goals, certain strategies in place. So those are underpinned by the values that drive the strategic and strategic goals. So when we take the actions as a result of our governance mechanisms, then the visibility and the communication is ethical judgment, is basically the ethical judgment. Then we must also understand at the same time, in because if we violate any ethical expectation, it can create a risk. So we must understand what are those risks and how. If a decision is not understood clearly, not communicated clearly, or maybe the community understands that it is unfair, the chance of misinterpretation can be huge. And then we cannot, if we wanted to take any tough decisions, for example, let's say we will not be supplying you with such and such material, or there'll be a delay in our let's say compensation to our community or to our employees, then those may not be understood. People may be saying that, oh, this is not an ethical decision. If you communicate decision clearly in a timely manner, then it can impact the public perceptions and all the stakeholder perception. Also, the information, we are increasingly living in a digital world, so multiple data source can create confusions. Then, even situations when they evolve, it can create a lot of uncertainty in our decision making. And then we assume quite a lot if we have incomplete data. So what we should do? We should have what are the known risks, clarity we should have on that. And then we must also practice some unknown scenarios so that we understand how we can respond to those. Then, as we mentioned, that there is a transparent communication with limited audience, that we what are the assumptions that we take, and then there is a consistent messaging. So when we talk about risks, who carries the risks? Who is responsible for that risk? Who can take the decisions? Who absorbs if there are any, let's say, financial implications? Which department, which team, which company, if you are part of a group, absorbs that financial loss? If there are any health and safety concerns, then how do we ensure that we have a clarity on which group faces those concerns? Then, of course, those weaker stakeholders, we must ensure that they are not disproportionately affected. Sometimes it is a case where we, sometimes will take those decisions, and those will impact directly our weaker stakeholders. For example, employees at a lower level are weaker stakeholders. So sometimes our decisions can affect them. Sometimes we have small customers. If we take some decisions, that those can get affected. So how do we balance those? How do we ensure that they are not disproportionately affected? Then we must ensure always, again, to emphasize, and I know that it is a repeated theme about the communication. Stakeholder communication is very, very important. And then, of course, the fairness in the risk distribution. So in short, just to summarize, it is not about making decisions. Any organizations in an emergency will make decisions. But what is your differentiating factor is that you make the decisions visible, you ensure that the stakeholders can understand your decisions, and that you have clarity on the justifications, on the assumptions, on the deviations that you took from the usual path. You have those justifications in place as well. So when we communicate, it builds understanding. Then the transparency in that communication builds credibility. Then if we have the interaction with the society, then it builds legitimacy, and of course the quality, because it increases if we have inputs from our stakeholders. Then we have increased visibility on the risks, and then we can take informed governance and balanced decisions, which ensures fairness. So another poll question. Thank you for your participation. And of course, yes, we have distributed poll results where in which some organizations are very well prepared, and some they are in various stages of being well prepared. So thank you so much. I would now request if there are any questions. So I have one question, that is, what is the practical steps that an organization can take before an emergency to ensure that they can balance speed of the decisions without and also at the same time proper governance is in place without delay in those decisions. So what can be done? This is a very important question, because the governance is something that is seen, is understood as it can slow things down. So as and when we escalate, we understand that there'll be a delay and we may not get feedback. But when we look at how good organizations, how well prepared organizations, which some of you have answered that they are, the good governance can enable speed. And why? Because then you are very sure you can take those decisions. They are not multiple decisions. There's a total clarity on who should make what decisions, and that can increase the speed, ensuring, of course, this is not achieved during an emergency. If you are preparing yourself during an emergency, you would make quite a lot of errors. However, when we are well prepared, we have clarity, we have, when people will know when to escalate and when to not escalate. People have very good clarity on that. As to, let's say I'm a decision maker myself, so I should know at what time, at what instance should I escalate the decisions that I normally take to a higher level, and to who, which position should take those decisions. Then this is very good for quicker decision making. And then what if we have unclear, uncertain, unreliable information? Then also we ensure that there is a value driven decision that can underpin, because remember, our decisions affect society, affect the groups. So we should answer those questions already. Who is deciding? What is an acceptable decision? That all should be answered pre-emergency. So in summary, clarity of roles is already there. When we have good governance, then we have good level of information. May not be complete, may be inaccurate, but we, from our practice, we know that this is something that we can rely on. And then we know about the values, so we are very clear in our decision making. Then there is a comment as well. Yes, so absolutely, there is a testing that can be done. You must have seen a lot of organizations in the Middle East sometimes run a drill, or run a simulation or a desktop exercise, or establish a crisis management team scenario. So those instances can happen and can be done, and then that can prepare you for different risk situation, and that can really prepare you well, provided that you improve, you have documentation, you have the right level of justifications and clarity on the emergency handling, and also the clarity on which are your weaker groups, clarity on the stakeholders, communication with the stakeholders. Coming back to the questions, the second question is, in a crisis, uh, how can we ensure, realistically, that we are not overlooking any vulnerable groups, and we are actually taking care of all the affected groups, the weaker sections? Very, again, a very good question. In an emergency, if a governing body is taking decisions, sometimes it is the first priority is, let's make things right internally. Then we will focus externally. What happens then? That then our decisions may affect the weaker part vulnerable groups or of those weaker sections. And when we do that, it is impacting on a long-term basis. So what we should do in a practical way to ensure that we have a good social responsibility considerations in our governance and decision making. So we must first is identification. Who are these stakeholders that can get affected? Then evaluate who are those stakeholders which are the weaker stakeholders which can get affected more quickly. Identification is the first. Then we must ask within these identified stakeholders that we have, which are those that can get affected more quickly and in a bigger manner. So the impact is huge for them, as against other stakeholders where similar situation can lower the impact. And then we must ensure at that time that at the leadership level we have accountability on the clarity, obtaining the clarity on who are these groups. So we must ensure that there is someone accountable for identification, for the evaluation of these groups, so that we have very good clarity. And then we involve these stakeholders, we communicate with them, we take their feedback, we take what is actionable on out of those feedbacks, and then we respond to them. So that can then create a very good system, the governance aspects, where we can then practically consider the social implications in our decision making. So just to summarize, the it is not important that we must always all our decisions must be perfect. That is not an expectation, but the decision should be fair, should be well communicated, should be also at the same time we based on the values that we have, and should be ethical and fair and risk based. So a lot of considerations happen, and when we repeat those scenarios, those drills, we become more and more fine tuned to be taking decisions in an expected manner, so that ultimately we take those decisions in a social responsibility manner. Another question is, in a real emergency, where we have to make, of course, we have to make quick decisions, but in reference to these, how do we balance the speed and also ensure that the governance actually works effectively? So it is, we have sometimes documents upon documents. For example, we have, let's say, sometimes crisis management plan, emergency response plan. Sometimes we have the considerations of various attacks through business continuity scenarios. So those or business continuity plans. So we have various plans in place, but really they are in documents. So they are theory as such. So we must ensure that our governance system is not theoretical, but it is operational. We understand how we can implement those aspects in our day-to-day operations in so that as and when the emergency happens, we are very well equipped. So again, it is about the clarity. It is about who makes those decisions, at which level in an organization the decision is made. But before that also, we must be clear on what is that escalation mechanism, what decisions have to be escalated, what decisions we can take ourselves. So that threshold has to be clear. Then at the same time, we can ensure that the interaction that we have had with various groups, various communities, the feedback that we received are also built into the plans that we have, a crisis management plan, emergency response plan. We build those feedbacks so that as and when we have an emergency, we know what are the areas that are going to be affected and we can respond accordingly. And then, of course, at the same time, the decisions can be transparent, have to be fair, and then the practical steps is that we ensure that there is adequate communication of the decision, and we understand because of our good preparedness, we are more fair in our decisions. So, what we should do, we should also consider various scenarios, not only one scenario. We must ensure that we consider what we know as a risk. We practice a response to those emergencies, and also emergencies that we think are very improbable, but we practice nonetheless, maybe at a different frequency than what we would practice for some other type of emergency, but we do that as well, so that there is a degree of organizational knowledge that is built up, so that in case such a scenario happens in future, you have a ready reference on how we can take those decisions in an effective manner, without any adverse undesirable impact on any particular weaker section of the society, of the community. Um, I'm back. There is, it seems, I think we can, yes. So, what role does enterprise risk management play in integrating social responsibility and governance during emergency response and recovery efforts? Very important question. The It is very important that we understand what are the risks that are uh, faced by an organization during an emergency. And when we are talking about the social responsibility angle, we must understand what are the risks that are faced by these groups. And then we must understand whether what is the level of those risks, whether they are as low as we desire them to be, or whether they are higher and we should take actions. So an ERM, or an enterprise risk management system, can play a very, very good role in ensuring that we have greater visibility, which can be understood if we have, again, communication with those stakeholders, so that we sometimes understand those risks from our perspective, but then when we communicate, we understand the risks from the stakeholder perspective as well. So as and when that happens, then we understand what are those risks, and we can then capture them in our ERM system and then take actions accordingly and incorporate them in our business processes, which can then help us to ensure that whenever we are responding, then we are quick, we are focused, we are fair, we are transparent, and that we can recover as desired, and we can help those communities, those stakeholders recover during an emergency. It is about the social responsibility part that we are focusing on. So we must ensure that we have those systems in place, those processes in place during the emergency, through documentation of those risks, and then the actions as a result of those risks. Then there is one more, which is in case, yes, in case the decisions are taken and they are not aligned with each other. One department takes a decision, another department takes another decision, and they conflict with each other. They are not completely aligned. Well, yes, that can create a lot of issues, that can create a lot of delay. But how can governance help in that? Uh, if I take you back in the presentation, we know that as and when this scenario happens, there is a process of review of those decisions. So in an emergency, we should also have that process of review in place, wherein which our decisions are reviewed, so that if there is a conflict in decision, so that if there is a decision that is delayed or unjustified, or there is no in a reference to clarity in the decision, then that decision is reviewed, more clarity is made, it is aligned, and then the decision is amended quickly in a short time frame, and that can then be communicated in a clear manner. So in case this happens where there is a misalignment, then the process of review of the decisions during an emergency only, because remember, we also have a lessons learned at the end of an emergency that we use to then implement those actions to improve our response. But during an emergency, we have a process of review of the decisions as well, so that then those decisions, if relevant, can be reviewed, because maybe the emergency can become bigger and bigger in scale. Maybe the emergency affects one aspect of our group of companies, maybe one company is affected, other is not, but our decision affects everyone. So it can lead to misalignment, it can lead to lack of stakeholder understanding of the rationale behind our decision. So to act in a socially responsible manner, we must ensure that our misaligned decisions are aligned as quickly as possible through a review process, to answer your question. I think there are no other there are no other there are no other there are no other questions. So thank you so much, and thanks for attending this session. Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.